For this video, I'm going to show how to create the site-to-site VPN connection. So like I said in the other video of the overview, you're going to need on the Azure side a virtual network. So the use case is that we want to connect the data center to the Azure resources in a secure fashion and not, have ports exposed to the internet. So we're going to have a virtual network here, then we're going to have a Windows Server VM with IIS installed on it, and it only has a private IP address on the NIC. So then we're going to have a gateway subnet, and that's required for the virtual network gateway. And then, for the virtual network gateway, we're also going to need public IP address. And then on the data center side, we're going to need, the company network, and then a routing device, and then it's a secure tunnel, through the internet. It's going to connect to that public IP address of the virtual network gateway, and then that's going to route it to the Windows Server VM through its private IP address, and then you'll be able to access IIS from your data center that's only on Azure. And there's other uses you could use it for, but that's the one I'm going to show. And the virtual network gateway uses IP addresses in the gateway subnet, and in the virtual network gateway it'll launch VMs in the gateway subnet, and then the VMs will provide the required routing services to do that routing. And so I'll start from there. So anyway, I'm going to simulate the on-company network by creating a virtual network, and then inside it have Windows Server like 2016, and I'll have both private and public IP address. So it's very similar to the point-to-site setup. And then what I said over here on the Azure side. And of course, I forgot to mention the local network gateway on the Azure side. And last thing is, on the Windows Server 2016 on Data Center, I'm going to install routing and remote services to act as like the router. Alright, so let's get started. So I'm going to start the Azure side first, and I'm going to create a virtual machine, Windows Server, and install IIS on it. So just I'm going to real quick show some of it. I'm going to create a new resource group. I'm going to call it Azure VM. And I'll do East, US. Change this to Windows Server 2019. And I'll create a new VNet. I'm going to call it Azure VNet. And this is fine. I'll just change it to subnet A. Just make sure that you have enough space. But just make sure that we don't create a public IP, because we just want the private one. Alright, so I'm going to come back after it's created. Alright, it's ready. So now I'm going to install IIS on it by using a custom script extension. And so you can use script files, so you browse, and I'm going to create a new storage account. So new storage, and I'll do V2. Everything else is fine. Okay, it's creating it. Alright, it's done. So you click that. That's the storage you want to use. Let's make a new container called whatever data. Open up the container and upload. Browse for it. Install IIS, PS1, PowerShell. Alright, it's in it. Then we select that file, select, and I don't want to add any more arguments, and create it. And since we only have a private IP, there's no way for me to verify that IIS is going to work by, putting the public IP address here, but we'll trust in it. Alright, the extension's done, and here it is. You can let's go back to our virtual machine, and here it is. So next thing, let's make the gateway subnet. So go to Overview, click the virtual network, so it opens it up. Go to Subnets, and do Gateway Subnet. And that's fine for address range. And I'll come back when it's ready. Okay, it's ready. So remember we created, it's in the East US, the virtual network, VM, everything. So now let's create the virtual network gateway. And unit gateway, and make sure it's in the same region, US East US, and VPN route based is fine, and skew depending on how much bandwidth and you need. I'll save VPN GW2. Generation 2 is fine, and I want the Azure virtual network. And I'll create a new public IP address. Public IP, and I'll leave those the same, and I'll create it. I'll come back when it's ready. Alright, while we're waiting, let's create the left side, the on-premises data center site, I guess. So let's create the virtual machine. And I'll call it data center VM. And I said I'll do Windows Server 2016. And this is going to have the private and public IP address. Alright, let's move to networking. So I want to create a new virtual network for the left side. I'll call it company VNet, and that's fine. And I'll create 2 subnets just in case we might need another one. And it's fine. And one dot slash 24. Okay, yep. And I do want the new public IP because I want private and public for this side. And I'll create it and I'll come back when it's ready. Alright, it's ready. So let's connect to it, RDP. And I'm going to add, the role feature of remote access and, routing services. I'll come back when it's ready. Alright, it's ready, so let's add that role for feature. And, yep. And look for remote access. Check it. Say next. And we want routing, so check that. Say add features. Next. Install. And I'll come back when it's ready. Alright, it's done, so you can close it. It says configuration required. So you click here and you say open the getting started wizard for post-deployment configuration. I'm going to choose deploy VPN only. And let me full screen it. And so now we have a routing remote access. And so I'm going to go to the data center VM. Whoops, didn't mean to left click it. Right click it and say configure enable routing remote access. The wizard pops up. And on the options, I'm going to do custom configuration, the last one. I want LAN routing and demand dial connections. Next. And finish. Alright, and then click start service, and now we'll have routing and remote access running, on our company VM. And now we have it. So now we just gotta wait for the virtual network gateway. Alright, it's done. So now we have the virtual network gateway. So the next thing to do is create the local network gateway. And put in the same region, so East US. And let's name it company gateway. And we need the IP address, which is going to be the representation of the infrastructure of the data center. So let's go find that. So we're going to need the VM, because that's the infrastructure in our data center. So the data center VM, and it's got its public IP address, copy. So address space, so that's going to be the same, but it's going to be our virtual network of their company. So just go address space, copy, and let's check events. Okay, yep, everything's good. So I'll come back when it's created. Okay, so it's ready. We got our local network gateway. And let's go actually to our virtual network gateway. And if we go to connections, we could create our site-to-site connection. But I just want to point out, when I made the point-to-site connection videos, I mentioned at some point that the virtual network gateway can work for both point-to-site and site-to-site. But if you notice here, if you do configure now, it has more options of like authentication type, tunnel type, and that's because it's a higher SKU, because the other one was basic. So the other one was just the root certificate and the address space. So just want to point that out. So it allows more features when you get higher SKUs. So anyways, let's create the connection, the site-to-site connection. So let's give it a name. Let's call it S2S Connect. Sure. And the different types are VNet, express route, and site-to-site. So we want the site-to-site one, using IPsec. And we can't change that because we're using this VNet gateway specifically. You choose your local network gateway. You can create one there if you didn't already have one. And shared key, pre-shared key. I'm just going to give a simple one, ABC 123. And we're also going to need to configure that for our company VM. And the company VM is just, is representing our data center environment. So everything else is good. Hit OK, and it's creating the connection. So while it's creating that, the next step we're going to have to do is remote into our data center VM, and we're going to have to configure it so that if it wants, to communicate with the Windows server in the Azure site, it needs to point to the public IP address of the virtual network gateway. So let's just pretend that that's done. I'll show it later. You could click on it and check the status and the properties and see how much data is going through it. But now I'm going to come to here. So let's go here, go to network interfaces, right click, say new demand dial interface, click next, and give it a name. I'll just call Azure. Next. And I'm going to connect using VPN, virtual private networking, and I'm going to change it to IKEV2, which is the VPN one. And then now you can enter the name or IP address of the router connecting to. So that's just a public IP address of the VPN gateway that we're using for sure. So let's get that. Looks like this is done. Here it is. Just let me show this real quick. And you can see data in, data out. If you look at, it's not connected. Anyway, so virtual network gateway. Here's the public IP address. Oh, you can't copy and paste. Wait, maybe I clicked it wrong. Let's try again. Control C. Okay, fine. 52.188.109.106. 52.108.109.166. 52.188.109.106. 52.108.109.106. Wow, I did terrible. 52.188.109.106. All right. And yes, we want to route IP packets on this interface. Next. And now we need to add a destination. So click add. So the destination is Azure Virtual Network on site. So let's go get that. Well, I could have just did that. Here we go, Azure Virtual Network, and it's 10.0.0.16. So 10.0.0.0, 10. Whoops. 10.0.0.0, and then it's /16. So first 16 bits, 255.255.0. If it's /24, it'd be another one, because 8, 16, 24, 32. For metric, you could just put whatever. I'm gonna put 10. And we're good for the destination. Click OK. Next. And I don't need credentials, passwords, so I'm just go next and finish. And you can see it created this on Azure demand dial. So you just click on it, right click and say connect, but we're gonna get an error because there's a thing we didn't do. And that is we didn't, authenticate, we didn't put in the pre-shared key in order to make the connection. So right click it, go to properties, go to security, and use pre-shared key for authentication. And we use that key that we created before, that simple one. Click OK. And it should work this time. So right click, connect, and it should work this time. And now we're connected. So now let's go to our company VM and get the private IP address and try to, here it is. Remote back in and open up Internet Explorer. And the reason to do this is to verify that the VPN connection is working. So IIS, which is on the Azure VM on the Azure site, and right now we're remote into the data center VM. So now we established that we verified that it's going through the virtual network gateway to the second site, the Azure site. So the site to site, it's working because IIS is in the VM and the virtual network on the Azure side. So I want to show something. If you go to IPv4 and go to static routes, so basically you're saying if we want anything that falls within this address range that we're trying to connect to, just send it to this Azure one over here. So anything that's trying to communicate in this range, it'll just be directed to this Azure interface, which is, you know, the virtual network gateway. So let's go check the virtual network gateway and see if see its status now. I mean, we could just go directly to it like that, or you could just come here and click connections and go to it. And you see now it says connected, and look, data is flowing through it now. So I think that's it. I showed how to set up a site-to-site VPN connection, and next video will probably be a gateway transit.